destined to be a lawyer? Was that something that you were?
No, just the opposite.
Yeah.
I went to, grew up in Jamestown, went east to college, liberal arts college. You know, you're not doing trade school training. And then at that point, I hadn't decided what I wanted to do when I grew up. And so I figured I should be considering something that was general. And going to law school was about as general as one could do. And so I went west, kind of geographical, to Washington University School of Law in St. Louis. And I still didn't know what I wanted to do, but I was trained as a lawyer, so I figured I might as well do it. I never intended to come back to Jamestown. I didn't realize its charms until I saw other places. And came back here and had a clerkship in Salamanca, deciding I didn't want to spend my life in Salamanca, and started a practice by myself. And it just built up. Clients came easily, and had a transactional practice of very infrequently going into court and doing various real property transactions, estates, business, etc., with kind of a specialization in big timber transactions and sewer and water districts.
And all of that is your reputation and a really high one. So when you were out in St. Louis, was there a professor or anybody that sort of was an aha moment guy for you that said, I'm in law school, maybe I should really actually practice it?
No.
Yeah.
No, it was something that was relatively passive.
Mm-hmm.
So it was something I kind of fell into rather than, for example, my son knew from the time he was in 5th grade exactly what he wanted to do and exactly where he wanted to go to school. I was just the opposite of that.
So you'd say, did you do anything there after you practiced? Did you pass the bar in Missouri? Did you take the bar here in New York?
I came back to New York, yeah.
Why Salamanca?
I applied to various places, and that's where it was, and that's where I got the situation that I wanted to do, and it was a good thing for a year.
What was the firm?
It was Homer Hutchison.
Tell me about him. I just know the name, and I don't know much about him.
Well, it was kind of an interesting experience because I did a lot of municipal law subsequently, and municipal law is difficult because there's no real good answers. It's not the clear black and white law. And he had been, when I went with him, he had been the city attorney 4 years previously for the city of Salamanca. Mm-hmm. And that experience, because of the lack of black and white law, had a mental effect on him. And he short-circuited. So for 4 years, he came to the office every day, and he was supposedly practicing, but he wasn't. When he woke up from it 2 years before I was there, he had a pile of mail in his office and started going through it. But he was a brilliant lawyer, but he just couldn't stand the gray areas. So I had a good experience with him, and he had a huge library. He had a library that went back from a number of law firms, and he was telling me, and I never saw him, but there were people that came around to oil the law books. Are you familiar with that?
No.
Yeah, all the law books were leather, and of course leather, when you keep it 100 years, just crumbles. And there were professional people that did nothing except go around and oil the books. He said they weren't around anymore, but it sounded like it wasn't that long ago that they were still around.
I mean, leathering baseball gloves, all that stuff, you do. I guess I conceptually get it, but wow. So in Salamanca, of course, we've all dabbled in it, and you worked there for a short period of time, in the wild world of Indian reservations and 99-year leases and, getting insurance on that stuff. Was that your first really grand awakening of that world?
Yeah, I think so. I was there in 75. Mm-hmm. The lease was expiring in 91. Okay. The non-Indians were used to thinking about it as their property, and there was a clash. Anything attached to the real property became the Indian. So if you build a house, they owned your house after 1991, and if they, if you planted a tree, you couldn't cut down the tree. It was their tree. It was their lumber, and so people were adjusting to that not very comfortably. But at that time, it was very possible not to. That didn't impinge very much in terms of what you were doing, except there wasn't much of a future for development because you wouldn't be developing for yourself. And the money, I think it was a $1 a year was the lease rental at the time. And of course, to come up to anything reasonable from that was a difficult thing. And so it was, a stagnant community. It would have been stagnant even without that burden. It was where the railroad lines came together, and the railroad wasn't what it used to be.
Peppercorn, part of the consideration. So there you decide, but you had to make sort of look your wife in the eyes and say, look, I think, I don't know if you're married then, but wife in the eyes and say, hey, I'm going to go out on my own. Come back to Jamestown. Was that a hard decision?
Well, moving back here was difficult for her. The climate was something that was difficult. She has adjusted after 46 years, but
mine too.
Yeah, but it was, and of course the thing is when you start out by yourself, I terminated what I was doing in Salamanca. I think it was at the end of June of 76, and I just told Homer I was quitting, and we were being supported. He wasn't paying me very much, and we were being supported by Kathy, who was working for ABM. And the day I quit, she came home and said that they had terminated her division, her election systems division. So we decided it was a good time to take a vacation. So we got in the car and took a long trip out west and had a good time. And then came back here in September. I opened an office. With our last $50, we threw a party, and away we went. I borrowed money for the practice, paid it back in 3 months, and I was making a living.
Where were you located?
Furniture Mart building.
Okay.
Yeah.
Who was in the Furniture Mart building? Were there other lawyers then? I know was there.
Yeah, there was, I forget what it was at the time, but like Erickson, Webb, Skolton came later. There was, the RQ, Quintus Anderson, had the whole third floor. It was quite an office building. Dave Raines from Cornell and Raines had, I think he managed it or owned it or something like that. Or maybe it was still managed by the Furniture Mart Corporation, because I think, in fact, they had a couple of marts there after I moved in, before I left, but the fire code violations were serious.
Yeah. Was there, Greg, when you're out by yourself, you're out by yourself. And I know one of the things you became proficient at, and we always admired, was your technical skills and your ability to do that which we all dreamed we could do. But at the same time, did you have a mentor? Did you have kind of a few, one or two lawyers that you were kind of go-to people as you were cruising along?
Boy, just like in law school, I guess I can't say that I did. You'd call people that would seem to know things, but it's not like I was at the side office for somebody that kept me on track. I just worked real hard to make sure I didn't do something that I didn't know what I was doing.
One of the things that you, at least in my mind's eye, see a relationship that you had with Ernie Leet. Ernie, who former partner of Robert Jackson's, and then known very much in municipal sewer work early on, and then of course you did much of that thereafter. Tell me a little bit about Ernie.
Well, Ernie was very passionate. He was passionate about sewers. He was passionate about Republican politics. He was a young Republican back in the 1930s. And he was still fighting those battles. He would tell me about the 1938 New York State Constitutional Convention, where they wanted to put something in there that would allow administrative agencies basically to make law. And he was against that. The legislature makes laws, and he had a big fight, and he won, and he just, he never forgot that. And it's the same thing with the sewer projects. He was quite a poet, and he would have these long multi-page poems that he would type, and I don't know if he gave it to anyone else, but he would come in and he'd give me the ribbon copy of it, and he would use words that were so arcane that he figured I wouldn't understand them, so he'd footnote them and define them for me. And he was just so passionate, it really distracted him from as successful a practice of law as he could have had. I don't know if you were ever at his house, but you go into his house and his dining room table was full of sewer materials. The things on the side you have to serve people if your table isn't full of sewer materials were just full of papers. And I met his wife. I never got to know her, but she must have been a long-suffering person. But and so he really focused more on his passions, but he kept the attitude throughout, and he was a proponent of the sewer districts. He was also quite an outdoorsman. He would get out and do canoeing and things like that. And he was always active. You couldn't go to a bar association meeting. I'd get there, and the rest of the time I'd spend talking to Ernie because he'd buttonhole me.
Yeah. Well, you had you saw somebody who at least would listen to him and understand his language.
Yes.
Now, where was his office?
Well, he was in the Goki building in later times. Yeah.
And so Ernie, did you feel, was there a passing of the torch at all? And did you feel like that since he was known at the time, way back when, sort of the big sewer guy, and you certainly became it, was there an actual succession process? Or?
Well, I think there was something of that. It wasn't as complete as it might have been for a couple of reasons. One is, his view of what should be done kind of got at cross purposes with what the county was doing, and so it was adversarial. One of my few court appearances was dealing with his suing the county and the sewer districts for I forget what now at this point, but and the other thing is at that point he really developed his interest in it. From the point of view of Ellicott. Ellicott I don't know if it was town councilman. He started in the early 30s. It was something like you'd be a judge and a councilman or something, and he would, and he was a special counsel for the town of Ellicott, and he didn't seem to represent a wide number of sewer and water districts, where what I developed, and really in an area, multi-county area, I probably represented 20 county, town districts, etc. So it wasn't so much that he was retiring and saying, I have all these clients that need specialized help. He was, mainly what I developed, but he was, he was clearly, he understood the law that applied to it, especially town districts.
I got to ask the question. Did he ever mention his relationship with Jackson? Did you ever?
Never did.
Yeah.
Never did. Yeah.
Well, but we'll talk off camera that I did interview Mary Lee. She was 98.
Oh, really?
Yeah, and that's a whole story unto itself. But they lived literally right across the street from Jackson. Over here.
Oh, yeah, by the Colony Motel there. Yeah.
So as you got into this sewer world, and it's a law which developed, and you certainly were very much, part of its development in the South Center Sewer District, and your name is synonymous with that. And could you kind of give from your perspective, sort of its genesis, perhaps, and its story, because it still continues to be a major player with regards to lake issues, with regards to lake sewer expansions and all that stuff. Do you kind of give a little primer on that?
Yeah, and it's so difficult to deal with infrastructure, especially in this context, because people develop around the lake not thinking of the consequences, not able to think of the consequences, because the society standards for waste disposal are very different now than they were. If you know the background in Jamestown, they had the sewage treatment plant first in the 1920s, and they just, going from the point of just discharging it into a river to the point of a very sophisticated control of nutrients and things that can cause health and environmental damage is a difficult thing. So you have a given case where people are around a lake and doing things that are currently thought to be terrible for it. And so what do you do about it? If you made them what does government do? If they say, okay, well, the people that are causing the pollution should pay for it, it gets prohibitively expensive, and people don't stand for it. So you have government programs that are generally too complicated, that will deal with paying part of it and telling you how you should do it. Most of the districts where we have construction, in the south and center districts, there was up to 87.5% federal and state funding, and there was still great opposition to what the local cost would be, and so you just have a very difficult thing. Most of the districts that I'm involved in, we'd be better off paying the people the value of their houses, tell them to go into a city where you can serve them more effectively, but that's not the American way. And to a certain extent, even though there's more expensive houses and around Chautauqua Lake, that's the case there. So you have all of these conflicting things that don't reconcile very well, and as a result, it can get very, very controversial, and that's what it had been. That's what Ernie Leet had been dealing with. In Celeron and West Ellicott, there was the Celeron West Ellicott Sewer Commission that was formed in the late 30s, and which turned over their infrastructure to the South and Center districts in early 1980s. And you had the density there that it was more effective to do it. And of course, the more density you have, the worse the pollution is, laying on the ground or not doing as well. And so you're dealing with those conflicts, and they seem to be worse in the South and Center districts and around the lake, and it became political. So it was just just telling people what the law is in order to properly do what needed to be done to put in the infrastructure was just a minuscule part of it. You're just going on years after years, going back and forth with controversy.
Did you find yourself dealing with the fine line between here's what the law is, sports fans deal with it, as opposed to here's what the law is, and by the way, I would like to advocate on this part of it, where it becomes legal, yes, but also you're an advocate for a position?
I wasn't really. I always thought of my position as serving the client and serving their needs. At an early stage, they dissolved there's a lot of controversy in the late 1970s. And things seemed to be falling apart. And at that point, the sewer boards, you have an administrative header body of the sewer districts under the county legislature. And the sewer boards were dissolved by the county legislature, and Joe Gerasi as county executive, was appointed as the administrative head of the districts. And one of the first things that he said to me was, don't tell me what I can't do. Tell me how to do what I want to do. And I think, serving a client, there's a lot to that. Right. There's a lot of provisions of the law. It isn't, just as Homer Hutchison found out, it isn't just a straightforward thing that this is the answer, this is a book like looking at a catechism or something. It's something where a lot of times there's interpretation. So I tried as much as I could to enable a client to accomplish what they wanted to.
Controversy arose with the bridge. Were you part of that at all?
When
the bridge, because that was sort of environmental, and the idea of this timing of the seeker, and though it's not a South Center issue, it's a lake issue.
Yeah, that was a little bit before me, but
Okay.
but that points out, the seeker is, of course, the environmental review you have to do before a project, is the thing that is to do it right. It's hard to do it. And when it was enacted, people didn't really believe how hard it was, and they sloughed over it, and for years, and still to a certain extent, that's the way to stop a project, that they didn't do the seeker right.
Absolutely. It's the ultimate two-edged sword.
Yeah.
We see that a lot here. So as you became kind of the master of this, even as you're talking now, you should be giving classes on it. Did other lawyers seek you out? I know I did, but did other lawyers seek you out as a referral source?
Oh yeah. They, as I say, I probably had at least 20 towns, counties, etc., and villages, and they would call me up and say, this is a little specialized, and they, that's the main source of the development of my practice in that area.
Were you ever tried to be enticed to do kind of a statewide beyond, go take your practice beyond the region?
Not much. I gave a lecture to up at Buffalo to appraisers on eminent domain. I was the first one in the area that ran eminent domain proceedings when the new law came in 1978. So that made me an expert in it, and so I did that. But I didn't really. I didn't have the contacts, and I was overly busy, so I didn't have the desire to do any more than I was doing. So there wasn't a motivation.
As your practice and location was the Furniture Mart building, and then you at some point actually took on somebody. There's a titled name, Yaw in New York.
Right.
Just for the camera, maybe just a little bit about Brian, just because I'm not sure the young attorneys might have paths would cross with Brian much.
Yeah, I formed the partnership. At first we shared office space, and then I figured, well, to really serve clients, since I was restricting my practice to a transactional practice, and he was more of a trial practice, I would, it'd make sense for us to be partners, kind of thinking that in order to maintain a client base, you had to give broader service. That assumption turns out to be incorrect, and we were together for 9 years, and then I simplified my life by being a sole practitioner for the next 30 years. Mm-hmm. But he did mainly trial work, and he was very successful at it. Back when we started practicing, the Supreme Court had just made a decision that attorney advertising was allowed, and attorneys were slow in getting into that. But he went to a seminar that told you how to do it, and he jumped into it with both feet, and really got the practice, before the big firms really started doing it in a multi-million-dollar television type of way. And I think he attracted a lot of cases, and was very successful in bringing a lot of them to a conclusion. So he was really focused mainly on personal injury type work after we dissolved the partnership.
Was he a native from the area?
Rochester.
Rochester, okay.
Yeah.
What brought him here?
I don't know. When I met him, he had already intended to come to Jamestown. Mm-hmm. I don't really know, though. Yeah.
Brian, don't take this personal. Should we interview you? So you find yourselves not only in, doing the municipal law, which is well known, and certainly timber sales. And when I think of big timber deals, there's always Greg Yaw. How did that happen?
Well, I was working with the county sewer districts with Forcon, mm-hmm. and I ended up, when I split up my partnership, going to the building that was owned by Forcon on 2nd Street. And
was that Kurt at the time?
Yeah, Kurt Bauer. And Kurt sold the building to his 3 principal employees, who I represented. And it was just very convenient that they referred a lot of timber work to me, and nobody was really doing that in that type of intense, focused way that I was. And it gets very specialized, because the title work you have to do is a lot more sophisticated than house transactions or something like that. And you have to know, when you're examining title, you're not just looking, you're thinking, well, where's the access? They have a clump of timber here, they got to get over this mountain to get to it. Do they have a right of way to get to it? Mm-hmm. And so I got that that type of expertise, and it turned out there's a lot of what's called TIMOs, timber management organizations, that are nationwide. And so there's a lot of big transactions going back and forth. I would have transactions where I'd have going through my trust account $25 million. And as a result, and we had very sophisticated loan transactions, at the intermediate level. Farm Credit does a lot, but most of the financing is done through, and purchasing is done through life insurance companies, MetLife, that type of thing. And I enjoyed that. The intellectual stimulation of not just doing routine paper shuffling for small transactions, sign here, you're really not thinking, is just very exciting. It's very stressful too, but I spent decades doing that and really enjoyed it.
Did you ever find yourself wondering, the survey doesn't show me exactly what I want to do? Maybe they don't. Maybe it's not even surveyed. Where you get in the car and go, and go to the lot and the location. Are you one of those guys that would go into the field and check out the particular property in question?
Some of that, yeah, but not as much, because the paper has to show it.
Yeah. Just sometimes understand it. I digress completely. John Goodell, on occasions, was one who would go out, and if it was a water right issue, if it was a dock issue, literally go into the water and
Yeah, I think people did that more. And when I was in Salamanca, one of Homer's things is he was a forwarding agent for Dun & Bradstreet Collections. I don't know if they even do that anymore, but his idea was get out there and meet the debtor. So before he even had sent a letter out or anything, he'd go out and knock on the door and say, "You owe this guy money. What are you going to do about it?" So I think that used to be more common than it's not a real efficient way of using the lawyer's time.
No, I don't think you do that nowadays. So then you practiced law, and was there an aha moment in your life, Greg, where you simply said, I've been a sole practitioner, I've done very well, and I got a great reputation, but just stop. You just sort of stopped.
Yeah, and it was, some things were coming together, but the really devastating moment was in 2013, September 29, 2013, when my longtime legal secretary, Tracy Maybach, died while she was running. And she, it's amazing, 23 years or so that she was with me. And by the way, her father was a board member of the North Chautauqua Lake Sewer District, which is, as she reminded me, why I hired her, because I liked her father and figured she wouldn't fall too far from the tree. But she died suddenly, and it was devastating. And I figured I would go on, keep practicing. But without that support, it was very much less. Then in 2016, my secretary at the time decided to take a job with the county, and she was in Westfield. She was coming over the hill in the wintertime after a few years, got a little bit old for her. And I decided, and it's difficult if you have a larger firm. I think you have multiple support staff, and you can absorb these things, but it is for a sole practitioner, where I was dealing with one very good secretary, it just didn't work. the idea of trying to acquire somebody and get them into integrated in the way I do things just seemed to be too much. I was 66 years old. Why do this for how much longer? And so I decided to stop. My wife has skills, so she was able to deal with the working out of that, but it was just, she did not want to do that for the indefinite future. So the rules of wrapping up a practice are very detailed, and I followed them closely and wrapped it up, and Fesson and Lammer and D'Angelo took over my files, and for that continuity worked well for people that didn't pick up their own files, and it worked out good. It was precipitous and a shame that if I hadn't been so precipitous, I just wanted to stop, and I didn't feel I could incorporate into anyone else's practice. But to a large extent, a very successful specialized practice where very few people or none did the type of thing that I did, just kind of got dissipated, where keeping it together would have been nice, but everything doesn't work.
Sure. Do you miss it?
I miss, especially people call me on real property things. Neil Robinson says I'm his library, and Tom Price and all that. But intellectually I miss it. But of course, once you stop that way, you have to stop all the way, because otherwise I could be fully involved, and I don't want to do that, not set up for it. But intellectually it's very challenging, especially when you're doing things like the sewer things that nobody else knows, and you got the answers for them.
Just out of curiosity, what are they doing in your absence?
It's
legally and all that stuff. Who gives them guidance?
For the sewer districts, the law department is for the county sewer districts. The law department's doing it, and Steve Abdel is great. He really knows what he's doing, and he worked with me for so many years when he was county attorney that I think he's acquired a lot. There's other attorneys that have done things. Neil Robinson took over a number of things. He's on the South and Center Board, is familiar with it. He took over some of my town and village ones. Some of them were not that active, so it didn't come to a head. But and in terms of timber work, that's kind of spread out. There's an attorney in Olean, Jessica Songster, who does this type of. She took over Lindholm's practice. Oil and gas, just as everything fell apart in oil and gas, and so she had worked with a Cutlersport law firm, Acker and Larson, who is just when I'm talking to them, it's like talking in the mirror. Their type of practice is just the same as mine. If they were in New York State, we had almost all our clients were mutual, and I do the New York part and they do the Pennsylvania part. And she worked with them for a while, so she has that type of background. So it's kind of dissipated, but not the various things not in any one place. It was a frustrating thing because municipal representatives, elected and non-elected, tend to want to overplay their hand. And for example, when we were when the South and Center District was taking over the Celeron-Ellicott Sewer Commission, the old Celeron plant needed to be decommissioned. And it was owned by the village of Celeron. And they thought that that was their biggest asset in the world. And so we had put in our grant that we would, that the federal government would and the state government would help decommission that plant. Well, Celeron ended up saying, "Oh, that's valuable. We've got something. We want to keep that. We're not going to give you that to decommission." So we lost our grant on it, and then they figured out it was a liability, not an asset. And so we were fighting about who's going to decommission the plant. And I remember Bill Parment under Joe Gerasi was handling that, and he said, "We'll do it. We all represent the same taxpayers. Why are we trying to see that we're going to get an advantage for Celeron or an advantage for the county on that?" And that type of conflict was repeated many times over many decades, that without the wisdom of saying we all represent the same taxpayers, we're all in this together. We shouldn't try to get, people would negotiate for the sake of negotiations. And it was just so frustrating because you're trying to accomplish something and you're fighting over little slivers of the pie. So it was the legal part was easier than the very parochial feeling of I'm going to show my voters and my taxpayers that we've really taken care of them.
You knew you were coming in today. You graciously accepted coming in to be interviewed by me in anticipation. Is there a question I haven't asked that you thought, gee, I wonder if Greg's going to ask that?
No. I'm impressed. I'd thought about what you might cover, and I thought about that. It's not that interesting, but in terms of what my experience is. But no, everything that I anticipated, you have covered very well, and you have elicited better than I could have. Started out speaking without your questions, which the sign I can tell you've been doing this for a while.
Well, you're a master, and I just enjoyed listening to your elucidation on areas which I frankly been at this almost as much as you, but in areas which I don't dabble in. So it's been phenomenal. As we kind of wrap it up, Greg, you were a sole practitioner virtually your entire career.
Yeah.
In today's legal world, there are many lawyers who come back to this area but find themselves contemplating or even in sole practice. And sometimes that can be daunting. Do you have any sort of advice, perhaps, from your experience?
It's if you could simplify your life that way, it is just so attractive. I'm so glad that I did that. I have the impression that proportionally many more attorneys are doing government work. And one thing I might mention, the way that I started, of course, you don't just hang out a shingle. As you can see, a lot of my practice came from the connection with the county. Well, the way that worked out is in 1973 there was a internship program where I was an intern in the county planning department. And I was working under John Lunsman, and it was a great experience for a couple of months. My assignment was markets for recycled, so I got into garbage before I got into sewage. But and of course, John Lunsman, while he was still alive, always said he still referred to my paper on that. And the thing is still the same. There's no stable markets for recyclables, and there aren't now, and it's getting worse. That was my report, and nobody wanted to hear it because they wanted to be environmentally good and recycle. Except for aluminum, there is nothing like that. Then when I came back here in 1976, I didn't know Joe Gerasi, who was the county executive, but I cold called him at his office and said, I'm an attorney, graduated from law school, just passed the bar. I want to stop a practice in Jamestown. I'm looking for a job. Do you have a job for me? And he said, well, he really wants to encourage people coming back to Jamestown or to Chautauqua County. And there was a program, CETA, Comprehensive Employment and Training Act at the time, where they had flexibility. So he created a position in the law department for me, half-time. So I was able to work up there, get minimal, it was $10,000 a year for half-time, get minimal income as I was building my private practice. Yeah. So it's nice to have something like that. If I had to just, especially without advertising, to just say, here I am, who can find me, it would have been a lot more difficult. So, having some connection or some governmental connection is good, but then my private practice, it was just a year later, my private practice was so busy I quit that job. But I've always been grateful for that little step up.
Was there any pressure at all for you to get into the family business?
There's the opportunity. And I felt that that I wouldn't be as good at it. And of course, I think I was avoiding deciding what I wanted to do when I grew up too. I still haven't decided probably, but I was apprehensive. I had seen that business is fairly regional. There's other ones throughout Western New York, and I had seen a number of second generation people come in and not have the background the first generation had and not run the business well. And I thought that was a real risk.
Now, what precipitated your dad to start Yaw Oil?
He was a salesman for Esso. Okay. They assigned him down here. They had a bulk plant. They operated directly here in Jamestown that they were consolidating out of and turning that into independent dealers. And that was done while he was a salesman, and somebody else, Clifford Swanson, owned the oil company, Swanson Oil Company. And Clifford was given 6 months to live, and he called my father in and said, you want to buy this? Closing in 6 months, and he did, and Clifford died, and my father had it. So he really acquired it, but it was something that was very much connected with what he was already doing.
Oh, this has been great, Greg. I really appreciate you taking the time to come in.
Well, I'm glad to come in. I hope it's interesting. You dredge things out you don't think of every day.